Então, o professor Ian Masschelein é professor, deixa eu pegar minha colinha aqui, é professor titular de Filosofia da Educação na Universidade de Louvain, na Bélgica, e é diretor do Laboratório para Educação e Sociedade da Faculdade de Psicologia e Ciências da Educação dessa universidade. Ele é autor de inúmeros artigos sobre o tema da educação e inúmeros livros também, dentre eles 2 livros que foram recentemente traduzidos para o português, um em defesa da escola, ambos saíram pela Autêntica, o primeiro deles em defesa da escola, já esgotada a primeira edição, acho que já há uma reimpressão, e um que ele está lançando hoje, que é a Pedagogia, a Democracia e a Escola, também ele da Autêntica, né? E, além disso, acho que há pelo menos, enfim, 2 livros com os quais eu tive algum contato, que são muito importantes. Ele organizou, junto com seu colega, Martin Simons, 2 coletâneas, 2 livros que têm coletâneas de artigos sobre 2 autores bastante importantes, né? Então, um deles é Rancière, Public Education and the Taming of Democracy, que eu traduziria por Rancière, a educação pública e a domesticação da democracia, e uma outra coletânea de textos sobre Foucault, governamentabilidade e educação. Bom, então é isso, eu passo a palavra ao professor Ian Masschelein. Eu queria, desde já, agradecer muito a presença dele, né? Ele foi uma figura, foi uma unanimidade entre nós, né? Quando nós pensamos em fazer nesse formato, com conferências de professores estrangeiros na noite. A gente tinha, tanto eu quanto o Júlio, não sei se a Cristiane também tinha, mas a gente tinha acabado de ler o livro dele, Em Defesa da Escola. A gente falou, é isso, vamos trazê-lo. Então é uma grande honra para nós aqui na Universidade de São Paulo poder recebê-lo. Okay, então passo a palavra para ele.
So, muchos obrigados. That's about the Portuguese that I know. So, sorry, I will not speak in Portuguese. I will speak in English. I will speak rather slowly, also for the translators. That makes it more easy, and for the ones who do understand English, I think it's also more easy not to speak too much. So, again, muchos obrigados, because thank you for the invitation and for offering the possibility to present some of the ideas, of my ideas and the ideas of my colleague Maarten Simons. Maybe you can give the first slide here. There will be not so many slides, but a few ones. I just want to show these because these quotes are a bit giving me the direction of the talk that I'm going to have. So one from Deligny. So il faut pas confondre la paroi de l'art. Closer. Sorry. Yeah. So il faut pas confondre la paroi de l'art avec l'agora démocratique. One of Foucault, the eye was not always already intended for contemplation, and one of Nancy, what is the gesture of the Lascaux painter. These are a little bit to give the direction of my talk. So the little book that I published with my colleague Maarten Simons, so in Portuguese, Em Defesa da Escola, uma questão pública, in Authentica, is a bit the horizon of my presentation. In this little book, we try to explain why, according to us, the school, but not as an institution, not the school as an institution as we know it, but as a particular pedagogic arrangement that emerged as an assemblage of practices, technologies, and inscriptions, how the school in that sense is not only a democratic invention, but perhaps even one which in a way is more radical than the invention of democracy itself. One which materializes the belief that there is no natural destination and that the world belongs to nobody in particular and therefore to everybody. And so with this, we conceive of the school as a kind of materialization of a certain belief. And we try in the book to indicate the main operations, which according to us are radical operations of the school, which I summarize now very quickly as follows. An operation to consider everyone as a student or a pupil, and you know that the first meaning of the Latin pupillus, that is orphan, yes, It is an orphan, so that means it is suspending the ties of every family, so your natural family, so to say, but also of the state or any closed community. So that's the first operation, to consider everyone as a pupil or as a student. The second operation is the one of suspension. That means putting temporarily out of effect the usual order of things. Third, the operation of making free time happen. You will know that in many languages the notion of school comes from the Greek skole, and that the first meaning of skole is not referring to learning. Skole is in the first place referring to a certain time, to free time, non-productive time. Yes? So the operation of making free time, so you could say it is a materialization and spatialization of skole, in the sense of this free time. So that's the third one. The fourth operation is the operation of making something public by putting that something on the table. And in a certain sense, that's an image, of course, that we take also from Hannah Arendt, the notion of the table, and I will come to talk about tables later on. So, but this operation of putting something on the table, we consider it to be an operation of profanation. It's an operation of profanation, of desacralizing or taking something out of a context and putting it on the table. The fifth operation is the one of making attentive. Yes, of making attentive, of attracting attention to something that is on the table and of forming the attention. And in this context, maybe later on I can come back to that, I will see, but this activity of making attentive has a lot to do with love. With love for the world and with love for the new generation, you could say. So, but that is, maybe some of you know this, and this is what we develop in the book. And we indicate also how school, from its very origin up to today, has been subject to all kinds of tactics and strategies, more or less effective to neutralize, to recuperate, to instrumentalize, to tame the school. And how today the school is even threatened by pure and simple abolition. And of course, we are also aware of the devastating critiques of the school as being something like a prison or even a camp, as a subjugating, oppressing, colonizing banking machinery, or as an outdated technology. However, we do not maintain that the school as we know it today is scholastic in the sense that we try to elaborate, as what I said, so not as an institution, but the school as a particular kind of gathering people and things. Could say that the school in that sense is something like a thing, in the sense that Heidegger reminds us that a thing is the notion thing is referring to a way of gathering that concerns us, that is about something that concerns us. So we take the school as a thing, not as an institution. And so we don't maintain that the actual school, or we could say we try to show that probably the actual school is often not school in that sense. And we do not intend to engage in a restoration, or a defense of the traditional school, on the contrary. But we do believe that it's worthwhile to try to unearth the radical and revolutionary operations of the school as a particular pedagogic arrangement and practice of making things public and gather people and things, you could add even animals, in order to think about its reinvention today. That's in fact a bit the summary of the book. But in my presentation now, I will not go directly into an analysis and defense of the operations of the school, but I will deal with them in an indirect way. Today I would like to present what I call another exercise in educational thought on the issue of the school. Some reflections which might broaden a bit the reach of the thoughts that we present in the book, In Defense of the School. So let me emphasize that it is not a theory of the school. It is an exercise in thought which maybe could incite you to approach the issue of the school in a different way. So an invitation, or try to invite you to cross the thoughts that we developed in the book. More particularly, I would like to take up the further hypothesis, maybe more disturbing hypothesis that lies behind our defense of the school. That is that maybe, so it is a hypothesis, that the school as pedagogic form is maybe the untaught of philosophy. And that maybe we can consider philosophy, at least in many of its forms, as one of the first attempts at taming the radical revolutionary character of the invention of the school. Now, we try to elaborate our hypothesis in various ways. One important one is to have a closer look at the scholastic practices that were invented and assembled by Isocrates rather than Socrates and Plato. That's one strategy to go to try to say something about this hypothesis. But the one I want to present to you here now tonight starts from a reflection on the relation between philosophy and caves, and offers some thoughts about the difference between the philosopher and the pedagogue. This elaboration implies the attempt to pay attention to the school as topos, in the sense of place, and so it takes into account topical experiences that pertain to the place. So, or to say it differently, school is for us also the name, so not only not the concept, the name of a place that allows for particular experiences. And as it will turn out, this topos always seems to be related to the presence of walls. And maybe we can go into the debate, we can come into that later. I'm not sure if screens do the job. So we will come to that. But walls, first of all, walls. So philosophy and education, as education, have at least one clear connection to caves. Indeed, to the present day, the movement of enlightenment and liberation as an ascending conversion that is so powerful, imagined in Plato's allegory, has been and still remains very attractive both to philosophers and educators. Notwithstanding the radical critiques that have been addressed at Plato's claims and the accusations of offering the seat for totalitarianism, the imagery of education as the liberation from the darkness of the cave to discover individually and with others the freedom that may come if we travel into the light remains very present. I quote now from an actual course in philosophy of education, not mine, but a course that is actually given at some American university. And of course, this imagery includes the duty to return into the cave precisely for liberating those, that means most people, captivated by the shadows. It is therefore a philosophical story that affirms the role of philosophy, and especially the necessity of the presence of the philosopher as educator, without whom it would be impossible to get out of the cave and realize, finally, just society. The liberating, you could say the educational and political role of the philosopher is something that the philosopher in this story takes up as a heroic duty. As Heidegger famously said, the philosopher who returns exposes himself to the risk of death. And it is clear that something of this aura of heroism remains part of the attractiveness of being a philosopher and an educator or as educator. So Plato's story offers thus a particular fabric of enlightenment, education, conversion, and liberation. This story had and still has a tremendous impact. Indeed, philosophy and philosophy of education seemed and still seem, explicitly or implicitly, to find in Plato's cave allegory their common inaugurating story, founding their own necessity and especially the necessity of the presence of a guide and liberator. And that's the word that Heidegger uses. The philosopher is the befreier, it's the liberator. Yeah. Even a very critical and analytical philosopher such as Stanley Cavell writes, and you can give the next. That's the. But I don't have to explain this. Everybody knows the allegory of the cave, so I don't have to explain this to this public. I think that would be too much. So this is just one of the images that you can find on the internet, where they explain or show you the allegory of the cave. So keep this in mind. That's the image that you know. Yeah, can you give the next? Yeah, that's the quote by Cavell. So Stanley Cavell writes that the allegory of the cave represents primarily a familiar place from which to locate the full beginning of what we understand philosophy to aspire to be. A perception of moral life as moving from a sense and state of imprisonment to the liberation of oneself by the transforming effect of what can be called philosophy. He writes about guiding the self to a path of enlightenment. And although philosophy does not speak first, but responds, he says, this response is the gesture of descending into the cave, marking the violence of mature judgment in assessing the life of the others. We are, after all, when we go back, telling them that they do not know what they are saying. Or to make a variation to that they do not take care of what they should take care of. Now, it is very clear that in this philosophical story, the cave is valued negatively, a place you have to escape from. In Plato, the cave is not the womb of life, it's no refuge, it's not a place of a ritual, but it's simply a prison. Fundamentally, the story offers a scenery of impotence and of necessary transcendence. Men, women, chained in darkness, trapped in sheer appearances, who, on the hand of the philosopher, so not the artist, because he's the one who shows the shadows, projects the shadows, but on the hand of the philosopher who breaks their chains, have to turn around and ascend to the light, leaving the cave behind and going to the bright world outside. The conversion being in fact a return to the world out of which they had felt into the darkness of a disastrous condition. Now I think that this philosophical cave story forgets, obscures, or even tames and appropriates what is at stake with the emergence of scholastic education. It delivers, you could say, the homo educabile to the custody and tutelage of the philosopher. I want to suggest an educational cave story, an educational look at the cave. The story that invites to reconsider the way we conceive of education, of the school and even of philosophy, questioning the fabric of enlightenment, education, conversion and liberation that constitutes Plato's philosophical story. This educational story of the cave is directly connected to the story of the beings that enter the cave to paint on its walls. Here, the scenery is not one of impotency, but of potency. It is not one of transcendence, but of immanence. This story also knows many versions and received attention from philosophers, although mostly also from writers and artists. So there are many versions, and maybe I say this, I will say it again later. So Plato is offering a story. Yes, I am also offering a story. It's a story. It's a lot of speculation about this. It's a story, not the truth about. But there are a lot of stories. But the version that interests me is precisely the one that does not overlook the phenomenology of the cave, the spatial and temporal experiences that are related to caves, the gesture of the act of painting itself, as well as the difference between the way in which a text and an image speak to us. It is a version that does not reduce the caves directly to symbolic places, and that doesn't trace the activities carried out with them directly to cultural or religious norms. So you can maybe show some of the images. So, oh no. Yeah, you can show some of the images. Continue. Yeah. No. Sorry. It's the next. I come back to this one. Next. Yeah. So we should show. I show some more later on. But you know these images. This is the images of the. These are now the images of one of the most famous caves. Meanwhile, the Chauvet cave, which is in southern France. With the oldest paintings. They are 32,000 years. 32,000 years old. But there are, meanwhile, many places where you find this kind of paintings all over the world. So it is about these paintings and the making of these paintings in caves that I want to talk. So the version about this that interests me is the one that does not immediately, because many interpretations of these things go directly into rituals, into religious practices, into trying to make to understand the meaning of it. Yes, the version that interests me is the one that does not go directly to this, but tries to capture also something of the gestures and of the experiences of making these things in these places. That is what interests me. This story is related, of course, in some way to the story of the emergence of art. And therefore, it is in this context interesting to refer to another old story about the emergence of painting. And I go to the well-known story of Pliny the Elder. And maybe you can go back one, go up. No, one more. Yeah, that's it. This is in fact a painting of the story that Pliny the Elder where he explains the origin of painting, and so he says that painting began with a Corinthian girl, the daughter of Butades. This is the Corinthian girl that you see there, who traced a line around the shadow of a young man. She was in love with this young man, whose image she reproduced before he was departing for going to war somewhere. She reproduced this image by tracing the line cast by a shadow on a wall lit by a lantern. So you could say here we have precisely the condition of darkness and shadows which Plato indicated, but that now serves as an analogy for the situation of the first painter. Butades' daughter creates a drawing, a line that attests to her inseparable attachment to a shadow. And her focus on the shadow could be, you could understand it, just as with Plato's prisoners, as the forgetting of true being, as clinging to an illusion, to a substitute for true reality. Because her beloved one is not there, she just keeps to an illusion. That's one way you could look at it. However, rather than focusing on the result, so the outline of a shadow on the wall, it is more interesting, as Hagi Keenan suggests, to consider the act of painting or sketching itself as a new gesture. A gesture that in fact demonstrates a response to an event as well as a certain disposition. Both the specific way that access is created to a world as well as the way the painter creates access to himself or herself. I don't go into the details of Keenan's argument here, but suffice it to say that he points out that the actions of the Corinthian girl must not be seen as an attempt to replace an absence with a new form of presence, but rather as an attempt to create a new place between the opposite poles of presence and absence. As an act, it is hardly anything at all, in fact, but rather it is something that opens up an in-between. And here I think it is especially noteworthy that in Plato's cave, the shadows aren't seen as shadows. And so they are not the subject of attention. Those in the cave do not see the shadows as shadows. They cannot distance themselves from the shadows, and so they cannot relate to the shadows. They cannot relate to them. Sorry, they cannot distance themselves from them in this way. But the girl does not capture or hold on to the presence of her beloved. Rather, she captures his absence, the shadow itself, and hence her separation from her beloved, which engenders or makes possible a new relationship. The line that she traces around the shadow is born of out of an act of creation. It is not so much a case of her projecting a personal vision onto the wall, but rather of her responding to what she sees, to something that presents itself to her, and of an in-between space being opened up. So this first painter reaches out her hand to the world, but only to the world as it appears on the wall. She draws a line that is itself, in fact, invisible, and that is only made visible by her sketch. So here, in this story of the origin of painting, it is not the philosopher, but the painter who embodies the possibility of an openness to the truth of the visible, of the shadow. It is she who makes it possible for the implicit presence of a line to assume an explicit form, and in turn to show itself as a line and as a shape. So the painter unlocks a dimension of the visible that was previously hidden. So the visible is no longer simply that which the eyes perceives, it is no longer the pure facade of things. The painter uncovers or discovers the world in the sense that she discovers and discloses the possibility of seeing the world as that which is being seen. As such, she can in fact see the world a second time. She can see the world once more, a second time. Yes, and I recall, it's just a note, just a little note. I recall that Comenius, yes, the famous philosopher, pedagogue Comenius, that he precisely states that his orbus pictus is precisely that. The world once more, a second time. And this second time offers precisely also the possibility of a second beginning. Of a second beginning. We can begin anew with the world. We can begin anew. So in that sense, Keenan says that it coincides with the emergence of a human look, of a liberated gaze that has released itself from the shadow of brute existence by learning to see the world as a reflection of its own image. This liberation is not pointing to transcendence, but to immanence. Now, I think it is not so difficult to relate this story about the emergence of painting to the man that entered the cave and made the drawings and paintings that have been discovered in various caves of southern Europe, and that are also seen by many as the first manifestations of art. But perhaps you can also see them as manifestation of man as a being that is capable of shaping his world. That means of the human as an animal educabile, a being without natural destiny. Looking at it in this way, we can clarify or try to clarify this specific register of representation, the specific gesture of monstration, and the specific experience which we lose when we only look at its absorption by religious or symbolic practices. So now I'm going into, so can we maybe show some more of these paintings? Yeah. Continue. Yeah. Another one. Yes. Go ahead. Hope you can see. Can you see the hand? The hand here. Yes, another one. Yeah. Another one. Okay. Maybe that. So in this story, we don't see the return of man to the light of eternal truth that shines behind his back in the cave. You have the picture in your mind. Now, it is not like that, but man enters the cave instead of leaving it. It's not fleeing it. And he creates lights himself. He makes the light with his hands and casts it ahead of his hands. And he casts it also on his hands. Yes, on its hands. It are these illuminated hands that show their capacity to create images, including images of the hands themselves. And that is what you see here, and what particularly interests me are these hands. You know probably a novel by Marguerite Duras, Negative Hands, Les Mains Négatives. That was the title, and also of a movie that she made on the same title. So these hands are made in two ways. You have negative hands and you have positive hands, and so they have long been thinking about how it worked. Now the positive hands, it's not difficult. You put your hand in the paint and you put your hand against the wall, and then you have the positive hand. But these was not so easy to find out how they did that, how they could. And now they think that there was a kind of paint that they took in their mouth, and that you put your hand against the wall, and then you spit the paint against the wall, so that you have this kind of effect. That's, again, it's a kind of theory, it's a kind of speculation. Nobody has seen that they did that, but that is the way that they think. So positive and negative hands. But so they create the images, including the images of the hands themselves. Besides, of course, the images, many images of animals, and not so many of humans. There are some, but not so many. An image so created by a being that also becomes the viewer of what his hands have created, which is now not simply an object or a tool, but indeed an image. Yes? It is, in a certain sense, you could say, the first time that man truly sees himself and sees the world. Think about the creation of the painting. And so the eyes of man were not by nature destined for contemplation, thought and attention. But it are these handmade images that also, you could say, open our eyes to the world like nothing else before. You could say that they create our eyes. They make both the world and ourselves visible or perceptible in new ways. In these lines, Jean-Paul Jouary suggests that these paintings were not possible because of certain capacities that were acquired and present, but the way around. that it were these practices that made these capacities developed. So he wrote a book with the title Et l'art créa l'homme. So it is not man that created art, but it is art that created man. He tries to develop this idea that it is not because we are human that we are longing for the aesthetic pleasure, but because we create that such feelings can emerge and that we can become human. Now, seeing the world and oneself always means seeing from a distance. But it is important here to notice that here the image is no longer a question of mirroring in the water or in the eyes of the others. You can see also in the eyes, you have there the mirrors, where you can have an image in a certain sense of the others. So it is not the mirror of the water, it is not the mirror of the eyes, it is the reflection of an image on a wall. The hand produces before the eyes, you could say, the subject of the first sight. It makes something visible, and it does so in full autonomy. In this cave, the hand is not shopping or carving or taking or caressing. It is not performing acts of survival, hunting, agriculture, fishing. It is not making objects. It is not making love. The purpose and the use of the hand have changed. It isn't adapting to the material, to objects, to tools, but it's applying paint to the wall. And the hand marks out a distance. The hand is placed on the wall and paint is spread over it from the mouth or immersed in the paint and pushed against the wall. That is immediately and literally presented to the eyes. And so here I recall the quote that I mentioned at the beginning from Fernand Deligny, a French philosopher and educator, who said not to confuse the wall of art, la paroi de l'art, with the marketplace of politics, the agora démocratique. I will come back to that, for me, important remark. Now, I said that as such, I am not concerned with the symbolic meaning of the painting, but with the sense and experience of a gesture that allows us to exist as beings with a capacity, you could say, to take ourselves by the hand. So think about a philosopher, that is the one who takes the other by the hand to take him out. But not as masters of the universe, but as beings who have undergone or experienced, you could say, education or formation. Yes. The capacity that here does not refer to an essence or a destiny that is to be recognized or acknowledged, but to a real experience of what you could call a present time. Yes, a present time, and it is very interesting that you can say that in the French and English. That is not easy to say, but in the French you can say that the now, that's the maintenant. It's the hand taking, touching, keeping. That's the maintenant. You could say the maintenant. This rift between past and future, if you may say it like that, is something like this hand holding in the literal sense of the French word for now, the maintenant. You could say that what we have here is a present, maybe in three senses. It is in the sense of a gift of something to see, but also, and very importantly, so of something to see in front of me. It is a pre-esse, being in front of before us. The world once more, but now in front or before us. A pre-esse which remains a relation, and therefore a possible inter-esse, being in between us. yes, which is maybe also the presence of this rupture, but it's maybe too much to say that, but I think you could relate it also to what I said, this rupture between past and future. So you see that I'm not interested in the symbolic, not in the meaning of these paintings, but the experience and the experimentation which are related to the gestures. And now, in relation to the experience, we should not forget that these are related to this very particular topos, the cave. In this story, the cave is not a prison, it is not a hell, it is not a temple, it is not an uterus. Above all, it is precisely a site of suspension, of separation or departure, separation or departure from a world of daily living and of the eternal cycle of natural life with its rhythms of day and night and of the seasons. It is a place of another spatial and temporal experience. So, should not forget, so we have not day and nights, we have no seasons. Maybe you know in caves have their own, let's say it in English, looking for the English word, their own climate, so to say. So caves have always the same temperature throughout the year, and the temperature is the average temperature of the location. So in here, if you would have caves in Sao Paulo, the caves throughout the year would have the same temperature, about, I don't know, 20 degrees, something average. In France, in some parts in France it's 12, in some it's 2. So it is a very particular milieu, it's a very particular place, out of time, out of space, so to say. Anyway, so it disturbs the rhythms of the day and night. You could say that it is a place without a place, so to say. And maybe you will recall that that is exactly the phrase that Foucault used to talk about heterotopias. C'est un lieu sans lieu. This is a place without place. Here is where you could say humankind, with the torch in the hand, becomes master of day and night. That there is no longer only time for living and time for working, but time for loving, if you want. But there is now time for attention and contemplation too. You could say that we find here the staging of a scenography in which attention is focused on one set of inscriptions, the paintings on the walls. The being that here is at once creating itself and being created, and so not the being that fell from paradise or from the heaven of ideas and was subsequently handed over to strange powers larger than himself, or defining him or her as incapable and weak. It is a being that, in the words of Monzin, finds the courage to enter the cave and to allow him or herself to be formed, whereby the interplay between light and dark plays a role as that which illuminates him or her. Here the relationship in which man is bound by the power of a specific reality transforms into a relationship, transforms into a visual relationship that offers the possibility of a rebirth, the possibility to relate to the self and to the world, and to start interacting with that world. Man stands facing a wall onto which he himself casts light, not sunlight or divine light, but the light of the torch in his hands. The wall is massive, mute, ungazing, impenetrable, but the wall is that on which he or she will rest his or her hand, that which she or he will touch. So the wall is not a self-reflective mirror. It's not like a mirror in which you are looking. You could say that the image of the hand on the wall is possibly the first non-speculative self-portrait of human being. So images are painted on the walls. And these images, so as you see them here, they are without horizon. They are in a certain sense without context. It's just the image of the hands, or the image of the horses, or of the bisons on the wall. And they are beyond the realm of normal time. So images of animals, images of hands, but also the hands, no longer instruments or objects, their manual power, temporarily removed or suspended, available as a shadow for contemplation and attention. The animals, no longer a prey or predator, but removed from the cycle of reproduction and survival, naked and beautiful. Not the idea, horse or bison, but an image that has been made and that removes the horse or the bison from its natural or social environment. So it discloses the animal, it discloses the hands from the contexts and the practices in which it is usually enclosed. They are disclosed from there, they are separated from that, and we can see them in a certain way as such. Without that, they are disclosed. So the images offer the possibility to contemplate and think. That means also to explore maybe new relationships with respect to the self, to others and the world at a distance. There is a little distance to the world. It is not the kind of distance from a top of a mountain that evokes reverence for the greatness of the world, or that sparks the imagining of conquest. I'm the master of the world, master of the universe, on the top of the mountain, I can see like that. It's not that distance, it's not that distance, but it's the distance, that's the distance. Yes, it's the distance at arm's length. It is at hand, within reach. Let me just make one brief extra note, side note, very brief. Let me recall a very early text of Bruno Latour on visualization and cognition, where he points towards a thinking with eyes and hands. That is the phrase that he uses, thinking with eyes and hands, and where he invites us to not relate the specificity of modern science to the existence of cultural differences, or to the happy existence of special minds, but, as he says, and I quote, to explanations that take writing and imaging craftsmanship into account, that take into account the hands and the inscriptions that they trace on flat surfaces, creating an optical device that presents the world before the eyes. And he recalls himself Heidegger's phrase that thinking is handwork, and adds that what is in the hand and at hand are inscriptions. Yes? And inscriptions, traces, left, are in the first place material and no conceptual or mental representations. So that was just a side note, but it is to make the connection to the flat wall, to the optical device that is made to something that is at a distance, present for us. Pre-esse is just in front of us. So here is maybe, you could say, but recall stories. Here is perhaps the origin of man's experience of an ability to act and dream in relation to the world, but also of a specific experience of togetherness, of sharing, not as when participating in a ritual or being part of a family, a tribe or a state, but as when being part of a viewing public. A viewing public, what shares a viewing public? That's the place, that's the walls, and that's what appears on the walls. So here we have the being together as a viewing public. That's a kind of being together, of sharing something, but not being part of the same family, not being part of the same state, but being part of a public, of a seeing public. So, seeing what appears on the walls, what cannot be grasped, the images cannot be taken by the hand, but they are made by the hand, but not cannot take them by the hand. But they can get names, and you can talk about them in the present. And you can maybe see how now in this story, the cave can turn into what I would call a pedagogical space, where the world can become, so a pedagogical space in the sense of a space where it is about the formation of the humankind, of the education of the humankind, where the world can become present for a second time, where an experience of ability, of being able to begin anew with the world at a certain distance can appear, where in a certain sense the world is at the end of your, at hand, within reach, but not in the sense of a dominating or an exploitative act, where a particular experience of sharing a world can be made, where that world can be the focus of attention. Remember, it is an optical device that creates really an attention to something. That is what it is about. Something with which we can interact, to which we can relate, and about which we can or want very often to speak. It is a place that offers walls on which in a certain way the world is made available and brought to life in a different second time. And it are walls that created time and space beyond the realm of normal time and the natural environment. And one could continue to tell the story of the cave as the story of the emergence of the school as a particular topos that allows for particular gestures, ways of being together, of particular experiences, mainly the experience of being able to begin anew. A topos that performs the operations that I spoke about at the beginning. If you recall the operations that we are dealing with in the defense of the school. I cannot go into all these operations, but let me add a few things before I come to the last part. With this story, it is not so difficult, I think, to understand that at least in this story we don't need a master philosopher who leads the way out of the cave and into a transcendent world and tells us that we don't know what we are saying. But maybe we can find some help from the pedagogue. That is the one who goes along the way to the cave and offers support in this initiative that demands a certain degree of courage, yes, to enter the cave. Yes, a child that must enter the school, you could say. There is a kind of courage, little courage that is needed to go into the cave. And you could say that the slave is precisely the one who in a certain way, give this little push, helps you to go over into the door, into the cave. And remember that the pedagogue of ancient Greeks were the slaves who brought the children to school, taking them out of the house, out of the oikos, not into the society, but to the school. Not into the polis, but to the school. And we could understand the teacher not only as the one who projects images on the wall, but also transforms the wall, and I come back to that, the wall into a table. I come immediately back to that, because the table is nothing else than a horizontal wall. So transforms the wall into a table and introduces words, thus naming the world and make it into a thing that can concern us, such that the world is made available to a being that is also made available to itself. That means that is able to contemplate, to study, to exercise. This teacher is a pedagogue to the extent that he keeps the door of the cave closed. Yes. I now quote, in fact, Jacques Rancière, who says that the task of the ignorant schoolmaster and the task of the master is to stay at the door and to keep the door closed so that you do not escape from the cave, but that you go into the discipline which is needed to pay attention, to focus your attention to the issue that is at stake. So in that sense, the pedagogue, I think, is the one who loves the school, is the one who is the guardian of the school, is the one who brings the child to the school, to the cave, and also make sure that the teacher is a school teacher, not just a teacher, a school teacher. That means that he closes the door, and goes into the exercise and the study. So let me now very briefly go into this story about a table. It's another story again. It's a story. For me, it was really, really fantastic to find that story, because I was looking for studies about tables, but it's very, very, very difficult to find. There's very, very, very little, and if there is, it is of course on design of table. You can find some things about the design of the table, but the kind of reflection on the table is very rare, very, very, very rare to find. But there is a very fantastic text. For me, it was a text by the French poet and writer Francis Ponge. And it's a book which is called La Table. And he tells of how the table has waited for mankind since the dawn of time. And of how the table is nothing more than the wall becoming horizontal, yes, resulting in this wall existing purely as a support or a medium of a pure ability. I will explain this very briefly. Maybe you can give the... I can continue. System hands. That's the pedagogue. You see. Yeah, you can go to the next one. Yeah. So, in a note from 10 December 1968, he first draws a very interesting connection between able, in table, in French, able, table, you have the same, is the same in French, and the Latin adjective habilis, and the adverb habile, and interesting, what it means is what may be, what can be. That's habilis. What is, in a certain sense, potential. What can be. What can be. It's able to be. Now, etymologically, table can be traced back to the Latin tabula, which is tablet, or board, or surface, interestingly also. But so in Ponge's for me, much more interesting version, table becomes the support or the foot, the mise sur pied of the habilis. Yes. So you have this sign. This is the T. Yes. And what Ponge says, yes, this is the potentiality, the pure ability, you could say. And the only thing is that the T is supporting the ability. It is the support of the ability. So in the phrase here, table is only a support. It is little more than a suffix. A suffix with its support column. But come to think of it, this suffix, however, means something else itself. It shows the pure possibility for the subject to which it is assigned. The possibility to be according to the radical, to the able. It qualifies the subject to which it is assigned as being possible according to the radical. For example, this is interchangeable. So the able means that it is possible to it can be interchanged. So the able is the possibility. So the table is the support of the pure possibility of the subject. So it qualifies the subject which is assigned as being possible according to the radical, capable of the capacity to be radical. In short, to obtain table using this suffix, it is standing with its back against the support column, the T, that pictographically defines it. And so we could say that table is only the substantification of a qualifying suffix, indicating only the pure ability. So the table as the support of pure ability, but also, he continues, as an invitation to make marks or to make traces, to draw lines. Yes. As something that itself does not move. Also interesting to take that into account when we would like to go to think about screens, yes, that you can move. Computer. So the table is something that itself does not move, but towards you move or drown, that carries, and by which things are supported in their ability. Now, before I conclude, let me come back briefly to the remark of Deligny that we should not confuse the wall of art with the agora démocratique. So, taking this idea also to the horizontal wall, to the table, so we should not confuse the table of the school with the table of negotiation. The table of the school is the table that makes scolaire. That makes free time, time to study and exercise. It allows for the experience that you are able, about ability. It is the table to trace upon, to make marks, to present something, to make public, to make attentive to something. Think about the blackboard. Everything is left out. You put something on the blackboard, and that is what you focus your attention on. And on the table, it's the same. It is the table of study, of writing and reading. But the table of negotiation, that is the table of dialogue. That is the table of negotium, of negotiation. So that is the opposite, so to say, of the free time, of the otium. Yes, it is the business. There are businesses. It is disputes about disputes and interests, not about interesse, but about interests. So you could say, in a certain way, it is the negation of the otium of free time. So the table of the school is not a negotiation table. It's not a table in the It's not a table of the parliament or whatever, but it's a different kind of table. I think that's also an important element. So you see, the stories that I told you try to offer a different fabric of enlightenment, education and liberation than the one that Plato offered. In these stories, caves, walls, tables, pedagogues and teachers seem to contribute to the shaping of a particular time, space, matter arrangement. In a certain way, a place without a place. But it is a place, it is a very concrete place, but not just as Foucault says about the heterotopia. The heterotopia, it's a place out of the usual order of places, but it's a place. So it's a place out of place. It's a time out of time. And it is this arrangement that I would like to suggest we call school. Its operations imply suspension. Suspension of the usual world, profanation, the disclosure. That means something. Think about the horses, think about the image, the hands. The movement, the profanation, meaning the movement that loses something from its economic and social context, sets it free, makes it public, de-appropriates it, gets it out of the context, puts it on the table as such. The horse as the horse, the beauty of the horse, the hand as the hand, and so on. So it sets it free, but at the same time it brings it closer. It is at the distance of the hand. It is on the table and makes it present. Makes it present, that it is there. You can focus on that. It offers it to the operations of profanation, the operation of contemplation and attention, all of which are connected to a certain temporal and spatial experience, an experience of ability and of immanence. An experience where we are also associated together in a very specific way. As I said already many times, these are only stories, and there are many more stories you could told, but this is not a theory of the school, it is even not the history of the school, but it is maybe an invitation to approach the school differently. So not as a camp or a prison, not as a home or a workplace, not as a parliament or a church, not as a place of initiation or socialization, but as the place, the time out of time of the homo educabile. That means where one can relate to and deal with the world, because it is the world that is in the focus. It is not the child, or it is the world that is in the focus here, and that is on the walls. It is there that you can develop this ability. So where one can relate to and deal with the world, not in the first place to be armed for the daily struggles of life, but in order to find maybe some references, some navigational aids for our existence in the night of times. As Michel Serres states, Plato worked with the image of enlightenment as the exit out of the darkness of the cave towards the sunlight of knowledge. And still, in the Enlightenment, darkness is the metaphor for ignorance. But today, Serres says, this image of being in the light of the day, where the sun shines on me, is rather the metaphor of ideology. Whereas the image of the starry night, where little lights come from everywhere, light up, extinguish, that this image offers maybe a better image to be used not only for science, but also for our existential conditions. And maybe school is a name for a place where we could get attentive to these little lights that disappear when exposed to the abundance of the presence of everything, every moment, all the time. Thank you.
Bom, muito obrigado. Thank you very much. Muito obrigado pela sua palestra, Ian. Eu queria então abrir a sessão de perguntas. Voltando a lembrar para vocês que a gente pode ter perguntas por escrito, e eu leio, ou as perguntas feitas lá no microfone. Só pedir novamente como foi a tarde, para que a gente tenha um maior número de participantes, que a gente restrinja a pergunta aí a 2 minutos, no máximo 3 minutos, ok? Então, se as pessoas quiserem, eu só vou pedir então para usar aquele microfone ali e fazer a pergunta de frente para a câmera ali atrás. Bom, e aí, então, enquanto as pessoas se animam a fazer a pergunta, eu queria começar fazendo mais do que uma pergunta, um pedido para você. Na última vez que você esteve no Brasil, ao comentar a sua obra em defesa da escola, né, ao dizer que ela não era evidentemente uma descrição empírica ou histórica, nem mesmo uma teoria da escola, mas você a considerava como uma pedra de toque, me parece que foi essa a sua expressão, uma touchstone, que nos permitiria, dentre outras coisas, pensar e refletir sobre o que seria a qualidade de educação, abandonando essa ideia tão comum que vincula qualidade da educação com o rendimento individual, né? Ou seja, que essa reflexão sobre a escola poderia, talvez, nos levar a pensar de uma outra forma acerca do que seria a qualidade da educação. E, na ocasião, não me foi possível fazer essa pergunta, dessa associação que você sugeriu ali, então eu gostaria de fazê-la agora, né? Então, se você pudesse retomar um pouco esse fio do pensamento que foi esboçado naquela ocasião, mas que ali não havia tempo para aprofundar, eu gostaria de te ouvir acerca desse tema, que é um objeto de muitas controvérsias, né? Ao mesmo tempo extremamente naturalizado, né? Como se a única forma por meio do qual nós pudéssemos pensar uma educação de qualidade seria esse rendimento individual, um rendimento individual que evidentemente é desigual e que, ao mesmo tempo, ele só assumiria a igualdade como um ponto lá na frente, né? Ele não é capaz de partir, como diz o Rancière, da própria ideia de igualdade, mas ao contrário, né? Ele coloca um padrão pré-estabelecido e a única discussão possível seria quais seriam os meios para atingir esse padrão dado de antemão. E me parece que, em alguma medida, você sugeriu que as reflexões que vocês fizeram no livro poderiam iluminar um pouco alguma ideia de qualidade. Então, eu gostaria, se fosse possível, que você voltasse a essas ideias. Bom, alguém mais para a gente começar? Por favor, Maria, se você puder. E se tiver mais alguém que já se habilita, podia ficar na fila, a gente vai fazer tal como no período da tarde. Rafael, eles pediram para a gente deixar ali por conta da filmagem, né? Então, se mais alguém já quiser também tomar uma posição para a questão, a gente faz um bloco de 3, 4 questões, resposta, mais um bloco.
Boa noite, tá bom? Queria perguntar ao professor...
Fala um pouco mais perto.
Gostaria de perguntar ao professor Ian se ele conhece a coletânea de 3 volumes do historiador Masschelein, que fala das crenças e da história das ideias e crenças religiosas. E naquele material ele estabelece que as simbologias que foram criadas pelo homem em todas as fases, desde onde ele começou, teria um foco importante para a relação daquela comunidade ou tribo com um ser supremo, ou Deus, ou até vários deuses. E aí eu queria perguntar se a figura e a imagem das mãos não estaria essencialmente nesse foco, ao invés daqueles que o professor colocou. E a segunda pergunta é sobre a alegoria de Platão, que tem um conceito consagrado historicamente, que está associado ao iluminismo, e que quebrar este paradigma conceitual não seria um tanto quanto vamos dizer assim, audacioso, não sei se essa é a palavra mais correta, é que o conceito de Platão ele já tem mais de 2000 anos que está estabelecido na história do pensamento, né?
Só umas questões sobre, então, né, pelo que eu entendi, um pouco rusticamente, o colocar a imagem na caverna seria o começo de uma criação artística, de uma liberação. E a escola seria uma formalização disso. E eu queria saber se tem alguma coisa a ver com a narrativa, com a questão da narrativa, que tem essa imagem e que, como o Riquet fala, o Paul Riquet fala do humanamente compreensível, né? Que se a narrativa põe o tempo para ser compreensível humanamente, o homem não consegue viver sem a narrativa. Dentro dessa questão, a arte, a imagem, onde estaria, né? Tem outra coisa também que eu acho que está tudo embaralhado na minha cabeça, que é a reconciliação do mundo, da Arendt, que me parece que puxa alguma coisa aí, né? Tem a ver com a experiência, de se reconciliar com a realidade, com a experiência, de que senão a gente fica preso, a gente fica estanque e não é liberado para agir. Acho que a arte, a narrativa, a reconciliação do mundo, não sei, está tudo embaralhado.
Boa noite. Bom, enfim, eu gostei bastante da palestra e da maneira como o senhor tratou da metáfora da escuridão, da noite, né? É claro que a metáfora da luz, né, ela exerce, e acho que até hoje, né, um fascínio muito grande sobre nós, educadores, né? E eu confesso que nunca tinha parado para pensar a escuridão como uma metáfora para o pintor, para o educador, para o pedagogo, para o filósofo, né? E, bom, enfim, eu pensei que algumas curiosidades, né? Que a bandeira brasileira tem um céu estrelado, né? E um poeta romântico, numa canção do exílio, disse que nosso céu tem mais estrelas, né? Então, a maneira como o senhor terminou a palestra, né, sugerindo a ideia de uma noite estrelada como uma metáfora para o educador, né, então me fez pensar, eu não sei se é uma provocação, uma pergunta ou só um depoimento, né, que talvez a gente possa fechar a porta, apagar a luz e contar uma história para os alunos. Não sei.
Okay. Yes, okay. So maybe first a question it's more about the book and the background of this about that. So indeed, at that point we had a discussion about the way, or there was a suggestion that I made that what we try to develop in the book is something that could be used in a discussion about the quality of education. So the discussion about the quality of education, that's a very present discussion, which is very, very present. And this question is very often discussed in terms of the measurement of performance. Yes, in English they use the notion benchmarking. That's a technical term to say we are going to define the performance, and the benchmarking is essentially a comparative measurement. So you can only be better. It is only about being better than somebody else. So benchmarking is always about making comparisons and then define what is the standard that you have to keep. But it is a measure of performance. Yes, a measure of performance. Today that means in Europe, I don't know how it is here, but in Europe a measure of performance today, and at least in part of Europe, I have the impression that, for example, in France, there is still some resistance to that, but in many parts of Europe, a measure of performance means how productive are you or how efficient and effective are you in terms of producing what they call learning outcomes. Yes, Lernergebnisse, learning outcomes. So you produce learning outcomes. And the question is, so notice here we have a translation of the issue of the school. That means of free time, yes, time which is not productive time, which is time to study and practice, which is always in a certain time losing time, in a certain way. Yeah. We have a transformation of this issue of school into as a free time, unproductive time, at least immediately unproductive. Of course, at the end, of course, but immediately unproductive. We have a translation into productive time, because now school is about producing outcomes. It's producing outcomes. So it means that there is no difference anymore between school time and production time. It's the same. It's production. School time is producing of learning outcomes. And if you classify something as a production time, then of course it is self-evident and very rational to say, and now we must make an efficient and effective production process. So as efficient and effective and fast as possible. Yes? That every production process, we try to make it as effective and efficient as possible. And so the measure of performance is precisely that. Now, what we suggested is you could talk about the quality of education in a different way. Instead of using a measure of performance, you could use a measure of authenticity. That is what a touchstone is. Yes, a touchstone. That is the stone. The most famous touchstone is the stone that you use to. It's a little rock that is used to see whether something that is very muddy and looks like gold is really gold. So you have to rub this what is looking like gold against the touchstone. Yes. And so you can see whether it is truly gold or not. So this is a measure of authenticity. Is it what it says that it is? Truly gold. So what we tried to develop in the book, this is precisely what we call a touchstone. So is this what is said to be a school? Is it truly a school? So, and that means, is it operating in the way that, according to us, a school should operate? Or that it is truly operating. It's like gold. You can do things with gold that you cannot do with other materials. Well, the same goes for the school. The same goes for the school. So that is the reasoning, the reasoning that we have. So we try to see whether we can, and of course it's an attempt. It's an attempt, and maybe we ourselves have been adding things and changing things again, but can we try to describe the features, the operations, and the figures, because I have not yet spoken a lot about figures, although I did a little bit about the pedagogue and the teacher, but the figures, and these figures These figures are not sociological types. So the figure of the teacher or the figure of the professor or the figure of the student is not a sociological type, but is defined by what we call a certain ethos. That means a certain way of relating to the world and to oneself. Yes. So, and also the school is populated by figures, some figures like the teacher or the student. Very often we are no students, even if we are sitting in the classroom. We are not students. We are not related in a certain way to the world as a student. Yes. So what we try to describe is the ethos of the figures. And I noticed in the very beginning that this ethos for us has very much to do with love. Certainly regarding the teacher, it has to do with love. And on the part of the student, you could say with being interested, being taken away in a certain way by something. But so also the operations, the characteristics, but also you could also go, and that is, you can discuss that, but you could also go into these spatial and temporal arrangements. So the framing, the fixing of a frame, a spatial frame and a temporal frame. And we think that is indeed part of, that is to make time, you have to spatialize it. that is in fact what the making of time is about. So this framing is essential to make time. So we are dealing with these things. To give maybe one very concrete example, which is something which we came up only by working on that, was that very often the starting point seems to be to think about school, about learning in general, about education. The starting point seems to be that the ideal would be the teacher, the master, and the apprentice. The master and the apprentice. That seems to be a kind of ideal. And the ideal would be one-to-one. And today you see that in the context of learning, that is precisely what they also say. The school, that is very old technology, because you sit with many people in the same room and they are all different and they have all different needs and very different. So the technology now allows to take into account all individual needs which are very different. So with the technology we can follow you and you and you in your very particular learning process. So the ideal would be one-to-one and taking into account the individual need. We think that this has nothing to do with the school. So thinking the school is not the solution, has not been an economic solution for the impossibility of paying for everybody an individual teacher. The school is not a solution, an economic solution, for the fact that we cannot pay for every individual a teacher. It is essential that it is a collective. It is essential that it is a collective. It is essential that I am not talking to you now one by one. Because you are more than one, I have to talk to everybody or to nobody particular. So I talk publicly. I have to speak publicly. I cannot address you alone. Yes? And moreover, it is also an element that makes that I am much more vulnerable. Yes? The teacher in a one-to-one situation is enormously powerful. Yes? Enormously powerful. In a one-to-one situation, the teacher has also the physical power. Yes? In this situation, if you want, you carry me out. You carry me out of the room. So whatever you want, I will not be able to. So I am in a vulnerable position, and I think all teachers know that when they enter the classroom, there's a bunch of people that they cannot simply control. So one of the elements to make an authentic school is that it is collective, for example. So you can try to formulate this kind of touchstone in that sense. Is that kind of answer? Then the question, no, I did not read the book you mentioned, at least if I understood the name right. Michael Yard? Was that the name? Michael Yard? Yard. Yeah. Yes, I don't know. No, I don't know. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. yes. Now I see the name. Yes, okay. Yes, I know the book. I will not say that I have read the whole book, but I know the book now. Yes, but I think, and maybe that relates also to the next the other question. So I am not doubting. I am really not doubting all the interpretations that can be made of these images and that are made of these images and the role that they play in the imagination in a different sense. In a different sense. The imagination of peoples and of... So I don't deny that. So I don't want to... I am not a specialist there. Not to go into a discussion. But maybe you should see, and I think you really should see, simply because it is a fantastic movie, that is The Cave of Forgotten Dreams by Werner Herzog. So The Cave of Forgotten Dreams, so he made in this Chauvet cave, this is this cave with this oldest paintings, so he made there a movie. It's a 3D movie also. It's fantastic images. And you see there also he discusses with in the place where the Chauvet cave is in the Ardèche. They also have built since the end of the 90s when the cave was found. They have built there a scientific research center where all kinds of paleontologists, geologists, and so on, and do research on this cave, on this cave paintings and on the cave. And so you hear also the stories that they tell, because if you really go into that material, it is incredible. It is incredible, and you cannot make it is really speculations. If these are the oldest ones. Yes. If these are the oldest ones, that's the oldest one we found, then they were immediately there, in this form. So people have tried to make that again. So painters have tried to make these things again. It's almost impossible to make them. It is very, very, very difficult. You must be a very, very good painter to be able to make that, and you must know they have made in these caves. So with the light of the torches, and these caves. So there is a wall, but the wall is of course not completely flat like that. It's going like that, and it's often in the ceiling, and so on and so on and so on. So there are a lot of enigmas about how they came about. And so I am not an expert, but what I wanted to say about the stories is that these stories always, for me, and I must tell you, I am not a professional caver, but I used to go from 18, 19 years old. I used to go caving. Je suis spéléologue. So I go caving a lot. And for me, there was always missing something in the ways that you have the stories about these paintings. And so I got in touch very early with the texts of Bataille, who is commenting very nice comments on these things, of Marguerite Duras about the negative hands, les mains négatives. But they always forget about the cave. They always forget about what it is to be in a cave, to be in front of a wall in that context, in that spatial and temporal context. They always seems to go directly to some meaning that it must have. And so there is, for sure, there is a meaning, and people will have been telling stories about it. But there is also, like in a school, I think, like in a school, it is also a very particular way of bringing people together. together, a very particular way of being together. It is a very particular way of dealing with things, of dealing with the world, of presenting the world. It's a very particular way to do that. And that is what interests us more. And there we can find more let's say, more interesting things for us in this context, more interesting things, for example, with people like Latour, who try to talk about the material inscriptions, who not go into stories, but try to make a kind of material analysis of what is happening and what is going on in science and so on. That is for us sometimes more inspiring or more useful to say what is happening in schools or in classrooms, or at least can happen in classrooms. I don't know whether that is it's not really an answer to your question, but it's. I'm not a specialist in that, so I'm not going to interpret these images, because I think there are very famous ones, like the ones of Leroy-Gourhan, also another Frenchman. I don't stop referring to French people in some way. These are all very, very famous, Leroy-Gourhan, but that, which is also very, very interesting to read, but also that is now questioned. It's very, very strongly questioned, this interpretation that he makes. But I'm not a specialist in that, so I don't want to go too much in that. For me, it is helping to talk today about what is at stake in school, and to offer an entrance into that debate. So in the defense of the school, we don't speak about that. In the defense of the school, we just end with a reverse of the allegory of the cave, which is just a very small passage. So that's why. Then about I could not follow very well the question about reconciliation. I don't know where it's not easy for me to understand what you exactly meant by reconciliation. No, okay. That is the context, so we can get some explanation. I can follow that. I can follow that. But there is an interesting remark that John Berger, which is not a Frenchman but lives in France, John Berger or Berger, or I don't know. So probably he calls himself now John Berger, but he's in fact an English writer, John Berger, and. He makes, I think, a really interesting remark. That is that we can hear every day the story. We know the story that we are not turning around that we are turning around the sun, and the sun is not turning around us. But that does not make that we see something different. So we can have these stories. But there is an element of seeing which is not to be reduced to understanding. Which is not to be reduced to understanding. And of course there is a relation, and there is a relationship, and we have to disentangle in a certain, or try to disentangle this relationship, but it is not the same. It is not the same. So you cannot resolve everything into narration. And moreover, I think that the school, because it is not about initiation and socialization, that you can not reduce it to being taken up in narratives. I think the school always implies a rupture. Always implies some rupture always, so a rupture means relations are interrupted. Always an interrupter. So that is different. That is a discussion I had already with some people in Brazil. Because apparently the oral tradition is very strong, and the reference to the local cultures and to the indigenous cultures who are oral and like that. And so there is, we don't question at any moment the importance of this. But for us, the school is the interruption of narrative. It is the possibility. So if you take serious this idea, which I think is also an Arendt idea in some sense, the possibility of a new beginning, it means a rupture. It means a rupture. So there is, and school is always a rupture. School is not initiation and not socialization. It is putting something on the table. And putting it on the table, that means that is putting it in the gap between past and future, if you want. And so there is this moment of interruption, the possibility that something new can be done with it. And that is the school is in a certain way the materialization of this gap. It is this gap maintained for some time. So you offer it, so you don't share it yet, You are not sharing it yet. So you are in a position of not yet sharing. But everything can be shared, but it is not yet shared. It is not yet shared. So there is this gap, I think. So in that sense, we are a little bit, reluctant to go too much with the idea of narrative and the importance of narrative. Was there another? And then the last one was about the light and the darkness. Now I must say I made a very quick association. It was a very quick association because I was just reading that book of Michel Serres, which is a recent book. I forgot the title now. It's a rather recent book, but he's talking mainly about science. Yes, and he's saying that this image of science, that science would bring the light, and that so the ignorant is the one who is dwelling in the darkness, that this is a very bad image of what science is about. Science, it's better to think about science in the sense of these are these little stars that sometimes come into the darkness, and this can offer some reference points for a kind of navigation. And I used that image because it was a bit easy for me to use it. So I don't want to go too far in that, but I think there is something about that, because I also said, wait, I have to take the quote. So I also said that so the school is not in the first place to be armed for daily struggles. Yes. That's in fact also a quote. I didn't say it, but in fact that's a quote. That's a quote from Masschelein. And Masschelein, who at some point says that we always talk about schools in the terms of that they would prepare the youth for the battles of life. We arm them for the battles of life. So it means that the school is there for society. The school is instrumental for society. And Masschelein then says we should not think about the school for society, but we should ask what would be a good society for the school. Yes. And for him, the school stays it because he develops that idea in relation to teaching of science, hard sciences. And so in there he also seems to imply that the possibility of having these lights, yes, of having these lines, therefore you need the possibility of study. You need to be able to have the possibility, that means the time to study, yes, the time to study and to focus your attention. And so there you could say, if society wants some reference points, then they must be a society that allows school to exist. Because school, in the broad sense, and don't mean not alone the secondary school, but therefore we must allow school to exist. We must have a society for school, because it is in the school conditions, so the conditions of free time, of not having to be immediately productive, of being able to develop a discipline of the mind and of the body in order to be concentrated on what you do, in order to set up experiments out of the point that you don't know where you go. So that means that you cannot think about education in terms of outcome, because in terms of outcome means that you know where you're going to go. So that is the condition of the school, creating the condition of the school. Society should do it. If society would like some reference points in the night of times. So therefore I made also this connection, in fact, to Serre. But I think it's for me it was a nice image that Serre used to talk about the science.
Bom, então acho que a gente tem tempo para mais uma rodada, né? 2, 3 questões, se tivermos, se as pessoas quiserem se aventurar. Pois não. Você quer passar por isso? Tá. Enquanto a questão chega, se alguém mais quiser... Por favor, então vai lá, Vanessa, enquanto...
Bom, boa noite. Tá dando pra ver? Tá ligado? Tem que falar pertinho. Posso levantar? Queria agradecer. Muito obrigada. E não é uma pergunta, na verdade é mais um comentário que ficou na minha cabeça. É o second time. Pela segunda vez. Esse second time ficou na minha cabeça. Essa ideia de que na caverna ou na escola, a gente, então, o objeto que está em cima da mesa é descontextualizado, é retirado do seu ambiente natural, social, sei lá, que vai claramente na contramão do que normalmente a gente fala sobre aprendizagem na escola, que quanto mais ao vivo, melhor. Então, a gente sai da sala de aula e tem que ver ao vivo, ou traz o mundo para a sala de aula, constrói uma mini-sociedade, faz experimentos. É o que a gente geralmente escuta. Então, gostei muito isso do second time. Eu liguei isso como se fosse uma segunda chance. Né? Nós tiramos o objeto do estudo do seu contexto e temos a chance de revê-lo, de vê-lo novamente. E daí, na verdade, eu estou provavelmente só repetindo coisas que você já disse, mas eu gostei, queria agradecer. E fiquei pensando um pouco nisso, da segunda chance, das novas possibilidades, que tem tudo a ver também com table, able, abilities, e aí por diante.
No, I'm going to speak in Portuguese. Okay? Bem, eu também queria dizer, acho que em nome de todos, agradecer imensamente por um momento espetacular que a gente testemunhou aqui. Um exercício de pensamento belíssimo, performativamente belíssimo, não é? Porque ele fazia acontecer aquilo sobre o que ele estava falando, não é? E eu queria também trazer uma espécie de espanto, que me parece muito vivo, principalmente por alguém que é um estudioso do Foucault, né, reconhecido por isso, e um estudioso em particular da noção de governamentalidade no Foucault, que é uma noção acachapante, é uma noção muito difícil essa, quando ela é conjugada com a ideia de educação, não é? E aí eu vi uma uma leitura absolutamente generosa com a ideia mesmo de escola, que, em geral, nos estudos Foucaultianos, é absolutamente posta em questão. Ela é questionada desde a sua base, a fundação, né, a própria ideia da fundação, da ideia de educação escolar, está associada a um tipo de mundo que, em alguma medida, está em oposição absoluta a essa noção de escola, essa noção generosa de escola que você apresenta. Então, isso me parece belíssimo, fazer uma espécie de giro na própria ideia de governamentalidade, dessa relação entre governamentalidade e educação, não é? E esse giro, talvez, no sentido que, em última instância, o Foucault gostasse, se levarmos em consideração a ideia do último Foucault, daquele mundo que ele estava trazendo à baila. Mas eu gostaria de saber como é que se opera, como é que se operou em você esse giro de uma leitura, eu acompanho os seus escritos, de uma leitura menos generosa, digamos assim, com a possibilidade de escola, para essa leitura completamente surpreendente, né, de pensar a escola num sentido distinto daquele que, em geral, a crítica Foucaultiana faz. Então, eu queria saber como é que um Foucaultiano se reconcilia com a minha ideia mesmo de escola, e que eu acho que foi o que a gente viu aqui, né? Por quais vias isso se deu?
Eu tenho ainda uma questão que me foi passada por escrito, na qual a pessoa diz que ela gostaria que você falasse mais a respeito de uma questão que foi colocada, que é essa de que o foco da educação deve ser o mundo. Sobretudo pensando em o que é o mundo para você hoje, né? Pensando no mundo atual, o que significaria que o foco da educação deva ser o mundo. Ok, podemos encerrar ou mais alguma última coisa? Então, ok. Então,
Okay, yeah, thank you. So maybe for the first comment, yes, I think you can give very easy examples. So in order to learn, you don't need a school. It's very clear. You learn most of the things outside of the school much faster and better than in the school. Yes? Starting point, your mother tongue. Not learned in the school. You did not learn that in the school. And it is the basic thing that then allows you more learning, so to say. So you don't need that. To learn your mother tongue, you don't need a school. But to have a look at it a second time, yes, in the sense of to dismantle it, to look at its grammar, to take the words as such out of their context and take them as words as such. That, I think, is something what the school is about. The same goes for numbers and for all these kind of things. I think the school is not about the initiation in things, but it's about this second. For me, it's about this second time. And for example, in relation to technology today, I think we should really, if there is one thing we should really do about the school, is really thinking about these technology courses. Because there it is also, again, like with the mother tongue, it's very clear that you don't have to teach the youngsters how to use these things. It's very clear that you don't have to teach them to use, and they use that very, very well. They learn it very, very quickly by themselves. It's no point. But maybe we must hire hackers as teachers, yes, that can explain us how these things works, that show us what is the grammar. Like we hire teachers that teach us about poetry in order to show us how language works, how language can do some things. So we need hackers to show us what technology is actually doing. We must not have courses about what is an iPad and what is I really don't think that is. So it is this second, that is related to this, for me, to this second time. So it is, and that is what I think, so it means that you can take a little distance to what is part of you, but not a distance in the sense of like that, but a distance in which you still can relate to it again. So that is the second time about for me. And it is indeed, I think you are also right that maybe that is that if there is one sentence that would be part of a pedagogic creed, of a pedagogic credo, then it would be this little phrase: just try again. You are able. So we repeat that again and again, but of course it goes often not, it does not work, and we have to repeat it again and again and again and again and again and again. But that's maybe the pedagogic creed. Yes, you are able. So despite everything what sociology tells us, despite everything what psychology teaches us, despite everything what biology teaches us, despite everything what philosophy says that we should or not should do or think, try. You are able. I think that's a creed. It's a starting. It's a little bit in the sense you could say that Rancière is talking about his assumption of equality. It's a little bit in this sense. It's a kind of starting point. It's not nothing that you can prove, but it's something that you can start from. And I think if you go into descriptions of teachers of their experiences, you will very often find these kind of things. So you are able. Yes, you are able. So it's not. That's another. So you have the philosophers, but you have also a very often. Certainly also in philosophical circles, an ethical reading of the school. And then the ethical in the sense of almost moral, ethical in the sense of you have to do this. In a secularized version that is in the Belgian context, that is you have talents and you have to develop your talents. Yes, you have to capitalize on your talents. You have to. But I think that's not a pedagogic phrase. It's not you have to. It's you are able. So for me that touches really this second time, this possibility of always re-beginning at something that takes up. Then the Foucault thing. Yes. So we have been very inspired by governmentality studies to make all kinds of analyses of the school, mainly also of the university and of the European higher education area, and the kind of subjectivities that are produced by this area, the way in which we are supposed to relate, the way in which we are supposed to think about what study is. The way in which you are supposed to think about what it is to be a professor at a university and all these kind of things. But yeah, we should not forget that for Foucault these governmentalities are regimes. It is not a system. It's not a structure. It's a regime of governmentality. So a regime has subjects, and like every regime, it has some time that it can live, and then it goes under, or it changes in another regime, or whatever. But the regime is not something fixed, and it depends on subjects. It depends on subjects that reproduce the regime in a certain way. But it means also, and I think that is what the later Foucault was explicitly. Probably it was, in a certain sense, always present. We can discuss about that, but at least at the end, or in the last part, he explicitly dealt with the fact that the regime can only function through our own subjectivity, and that means through the way in which we relate to the world and to ourselves and to others, And this we can change. And as he very, for me in a very fantastic way shows in the hermeneutics of the subject, is that this can change in two ways. It can change one way is it can change suddenly, like the world for you can change when you fall in love. Then the world yesterday and the world today is totally different in a certain sense. That's the moment. That's the moment that you change in a certain. It's the event, if you want. But the other way, which he develops in the hermeneutics of the subject, is much more interesting for us. I think for the educational thinking, that's about the exercise. That's about the discipline of the self, the discipline of the mind, the discipline of the body. That is about the way in which you need others, and how you need others in order to work on subjectivity, if you want. And he gives there many examples, and they go also, of course, also in different ways. But I think it is probably one of the very, very good. I don't dare to say the best, but the very good books in educational philosophy, I think. And recall that for Foucault, writing was a way to put himself to the test. That is how he says it. To put my thinking to the test. That means to make it possible that I change. So it was essentially, I think, or it is an educational, it is a true educational thinking, I think. I don't know if that is not really complete answer, but it's and of course if you go into discipline, surveiller punir, if you go in you can read it very strongly in the sense of a complete a very harsh critique on the school and what the school is doing and how it is preparing bodies for and so on. But I think it always implies also the possibility of an opening. It is never a kind of closed system or structure or whatever. Never. So that's and then the focus of education on the world. Yes, I said that a little bit provocative, but I keep coming back to the last few sentences of Hannah Arendt's text on education. And there is a double love for the educator. That is the love for the world, and the love for the new generation. But I can put it, the love for the new generation. The love for the new generation, that means offering the new generation the possibility of do something new. And then she says, in order to do so, you must avoid to define yourself what that must be, because then if you yourself define the future, you offer not the future, the possibility to the new generation to have their own future. So offering the possibility of new beginning means offering the world in such a way, not in a distant way, because then also you don't offer the possibility that the new can begin with the world again, but offer it in a way that in a certain way you show the love, you show your love for the world, your interest in the world. Yeah. To phrase it in the discourse of today. Very often today we say, at least, but I suppose it is here the same. Huh? We say teaching and school must be student-centered. Student-centered. Yeah? At the university, the student is the center. Is the center, and everything must be taught starting from the center of the student. In the school, in the classroom, it is you. Huh? It is about you. You as an individual learner. Your needs must be taken into account. Your individual needs must be taken into account. You are the most important, because it's you. It's about you. So how would we be able to interest somebody in something else than himself if we constantly say that he or she is the center of the world? So if we constantly say, you are the center, you are the center, you are the center, how are we going to relate people to something outside themselves, to a world, something outside themselves? We constantly say it is about you, it's about you. No, it's not about you. It's precisely, or it is about you, but because it is about you, it is not about you. Because if we want to give you a future, we must give you something that means, or can start to mean something for you. That you can develop the love for language, the love for the wood, the love for whatever. That you can, that something can enter your life and make your life meaningful. Therefore, we must show that there are things that are more important than you. Otherwise, you will not be able. So I show you that the language, look, this language is very beautiful. Yes. It's a fantastic thing. I will show you how fantastic it is. And maybe, and of course, it does not work for all children in all cases. It's not a production. It's not a production. But it is making the world interesting. I think that is what the school is about. It's making the world interesting, and that is offering the possibility to the new generation to renew the world. So I started, I think, by saying that the first operation of the school is to make us into students, or to make us into pupils, and in both senses that means in fact, as I said, orphans. So the school is saying our children are not our children. That is what the school is saying. Our children are not our children. You are not the son of the daughter at school, and you are not a citizen. No, you are a student and a pupil. That is what you are. And that means that the society who decides to have a school is a society that decides that it wants to put itself on the table, that it wants to offer itself to the new generation in a certain sense. But I think that today that is at least there are many things that go in a totally different direction. And therefore, I also say that that I think really that if you want a school, that is a decision. So the school is not the service. It's not the decision of an individual that needs a service in order to better learn, as if the school was offering a kind of service to better learn. No, the school is something that is decided by a society, by a community. The school is an issue of the community that decides we are prepared to say our children are not our children. We are prepared to risk our community. We are prepared to risk our community, because that is the only way. So that is the rupture that I talked about. That is the only way that we can offer the new generation the real possibility of a future, so not of a continuation, but of a future. So that's. Okay, I'll stop. Sorry.
No, on the contrary. Thank you very much. Bom, eu queria então, em nome da Faculdade de Educação e dos professores da área de Filosofia da Educação, agradecer muito a você e ao Masschelein e dizer que foi um exercício de pensamento extremamente proveitoso para todos nós. Então, muito obrigado, boa noite, espero contar com vocês também aqui amanhã, ok? E muito obrigado. Thank you very much.